My name is Marco Gonzalez, and this is my sign name. I'm a proud father of two sons. My oldest son is 3, and his name is Marco Jr. My younger son is named Mateo, and he's 10 months old. The name Mateo means gift from God. Every morning, I work out at the gym with my boys. We play basketball, go cycling. I really just love to get out and be active. I know I gotta go to work and pay the bills, but I'd rather much play ball with my homies, to be honest. When I was little, my parents were always fighting with each other. My dad left home and I never knew why. There were 4 of us altogether. I have 2 sisters and a brother. I'm the only one from a different father. So, when my father left, we all moved to Florida, and I had no idea why because no one ever told me. But my mother had severe depression, and the depression really affected me. Even though she was depressed, I knew deep down inside she cared for us. My mom ended up killing herself one night when I was alone with her. I heard a loud sound and I realized that she had shot herself in the chest. One can only imagine how that affected me growing up. My uncle ended up adopting us. It's a tradition in the Puerto Rican culture for parents to punish their kids by scolding and whipping them, but for me, it was even worse because I was deaf. I had no ability to communicate with my uncle, and I had to be very careful around him or he'd beat me up. When my uncle was around, I was an angel, but as soon as he left, boy, would I get into trouble. In school, I was a troublemaker too, and I was really paranoid that my uncle would find out about how I misbehaved in school. So every day, I would get home early at around 3 o'clock and would run to the mailbox and grab any mail from the school. If I found a letter, I'd rip it up and throw it out. So when my uncle got home at 3:15, he never knew about the letters from school. So for the longest time, that's how I stayed out of trouble. The first school that I went to was Clark School for the Deaf in Northampton, Massachusetts. Then I moved home to Florida and attended Florida State School for the Deaf and Blind, and the communication there was very confusing. It was a mix of signing and speaking and everything in between. Just gibberish, really. After that, I moved to Worcester, Massachusetts, and I was forced into public schools that didn't fit my needs as a deaf student. I stayed there until I was about 15. Up to that point, my sister thought that I was doing really well in school. She'd always check up on me to see if I'd finished my homework, and then she'd ask me what I learned that day. But I had a trick up my sleeve. I'd read the newspaper every day before I went to school so that I'd be ready for her questions when I got home. When she asked me what I learned, I would recite what I had read in the newspaper that morning. So my sister thought that I was brilliant and was learning a lot in school, which I wasn't. I think it was at an IEP meeting where my sister got really upset because she never realized that I was actually reading on a second grade level. So that's when she took action and placed me at the American School for the Deaf in West Hartford, where everyone was using American Sign Language. It was so easy to communicate, but my sign gibberish didn't make any sense to my new deaf friends. But I was able to pick up ASL and become fluent really quickly. It was a great experience. I'm the only person in my family who's deaf. I was born with hearing but lost it later on, and my family just wasn't motivated to learn sign language because they didn't know any better. They had never been exposed to deaf culture or American Sign Language. When I was 15 and I transferred to the American School for the Deaf, they finally began to learn more about deaf culture. A peer family specialist who visited my family told me that they had a long way to go. We didn't understand each other, they judged me, they looked down on me, and they thought that I'd never be able to succeed because I'm deaf. But now my family sees how successful I am, and I think they're very impressed by that. How did I realize that my life was out of control? I was actually oblivious to it. My mom died when I was 5 or 6, and it was Halloween night. As I said, it was traumatizing, and I wasn't dealing with my mom's death at all. Afterward, I pretended everything was fine. For many years, I wouldn't accept it. I got into a lot of trouble and a lot of difficult situations, and I was frustrated because I couldn't communicate at home. But when I got to the American School for the Deaf, I finally felt comfortable. It was like I belonged. I could finally talk with people in a natural way through ASL. It wasn't until 1996 when I graduated from high school. Remember how I said I never dealt with my mom's suicide? Well, as soon as I finally faced my mom's death, my world fell apart and I was out of control. My emotions totally overwhelmed me. I started using heroin, smoking pot, and abusing alcohol, and I have no idea why that was. But in retrospect, I think that it made me feel good. It was the first time that I actually felt happy. I started using heroin because my brother was constantly in and out of jail for many years. He was the head of a gang and found himself incarcerated for many years because of that. At that point, I had my own apartment. My brother was just released and had no place to live, and back then I didn't really understand what addiction meant. I knew that drugs were bad because you'd see that in movies and TV. People would always talk about how bad drugs were. Then my brother moved in, and I offered him a place to stay to live in exchange for a heroin fix every day. If he didn't give me heroin, then I threatened to kick him out. So that led to my addiction. I used heroin every day, and for a long time I'd hibernate for hours and hours at a time. I would sleep at an average of 16 hours a night. I'd wake up, I'd get my fix, and if I didn't have heroin, I'd get dope sick. I hardly ever left the house. For example, at that time, if my family was having a birthday party for my nieces and nephews, I would rarely go. I remember my nephew and niece when they were little, and then all of a sudden it was like I blinked my eyes and they were all grown up. I missed their childhood because of my addiction. I don't know if I blamed myself for messing up my life, but I do know that I never felt good about myself. Because my mom passed away, because I'm deaf, because I experienced sexual abuse, because my father was an alcoholic and abused me. My biological father abandoned me, and he never came back to visit for years and years. I would sit there by the window and wait for him to come back, but he never did. I always thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't know if it was because I was deaf or something else. I also felt really lonely because I couldn't easily communicate with people. But I never thought about blaming myself. I just always felt like I wasn't good enough. Well, I went to a detox center and a rehabilitation center, but it did me no good. I didn't really understand what it was about, but they hardly ever had interpreters. But I did find my way to a lot of different detox centers and spent a lot of time there. When I was in Lynn, Massachusetts, I met someone who was schizophrenic. He was in recovery for about 20 years and was very knowledgeable about sobriety. And he took me under his wing and really wanted to help me. He had this wild idea of biking around the state in an attempt to stay sober. So we went north of Boston. I can't exactly remember where. We brought our bikes on the train. And when we got off, we started bicycling for about 4 hours. We went to meetings in Salem and Beverly and a whole bunch of towns around the state. We just bicycle around from meeting to meeting, drinking tons of coffee to stay awake. We finally made our way back to Lynn, and that was a pretty amazing experience. Of course, I was in and out of hospitals at the time because it was a place where I felt safe. I stayed in one hospital for 2 years because I'd just try anything to not relapse. Even being locked up in a hospital was better. I knew that if I had left the hospital, I'd be out using again. Addiction is extremely powerful and can control you. There's a huge difference between how an addict thinks and how a sober person thinks. When you're sober, you're much more rational and optimistic. I can think clearly, I know what I want, I have goals, and I realize that I can achieve whatever I want. When I'm in an addicted frame of mind, it's very dangerous because I feel like I'm in a fog and I feel like I want to die. When I'm sober, I feel like I want to live, but because I bounce back and forth between these two ways of thinking, life is kind of difficult. Sometimes I feel like I want to follow my mother's footsteps, but I know that's not a healthy way of thinking. But these are the demons I face every day. It's interesting. I don't notice when I'm getting better, but other people do. Like, I was offered a job as a peer specialist at one point, and I had no idea what that even meant. I had no clue. At one point, I went to the CPS training to become a certified peer specialist, and through that class, I learned a huge amount. I realized that this is the perfect job for me because I can see the light in people, and I know how to help people who are struggling themselves because of my own personal experiences of addiction and recovery. And I know that through my job, I have helped a lot of people succeed and get on the right path. But up to that point, I didn't realize I had that potential. If I'm doing well, it means I'm helping people out and seeing their progress. I'm seeing them succeed. But my biggest challenge, which is an everyday challenge, is people from the community throwing my history back in my face. Like when people say, "Oh, you know Marco, he's going to relapse. You can't trust him, he's no good." That's the biggest challenge. People telling me that I'm going to relapse. But when I'm at work and I'm seeing success, I'm seeing people's lives change, and I'm helping them out, that's the best. For example, I helped a client find a hobby that he loves, and now he goes fishing all the time. What makes me happy right now is that people in the community think good of me. The word on the street is that I'm a good father and a good guy, and that feels great. But, I still think I could feel better about myself. But approval from the community really does mean a lot. It's so hard to accept positive feedback from the community because for so many years it was always, Marco's a horrible guy and an addict and a bad person. So to change that negative way of thinking is really hard. I used to spiral down into depression and I'd use heroin or think about suicide. I wanted more than anything to die, and now I want more than anything to be alive. When I'm upset now, I know how to take care of myself. I can talk to somebody, I can get out there and exercise and keep busy, and I know that the stressful negative thoughts will go away. I know that negative thinking can lead to a place of no good. So as soon as I notice it's happening, I try to change my outlook as quickly as possible. What really helps me is knowing that someone believes in me. That's important because if no one believed in me, I don't even know where I would be right now. Being a peer specialist has helped me immensely. The reason for that is because in the deaf community, there's a lot of severe trauma. And I don't want the deaf community to have to suffer like I have. The deaf community needs to come together and help each other out. Kind of like the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Martin Luther King was the leader who called the black community together, and the result was getting equal rights. So if the deaf community comes together and we support each other and work together, we could all lift each other up in the same way.